welcome to the Everything Saxophone Podcast. David Demsey, I'm so happy to have you on. The big buzz lately has been, and it's not lately for you because this has been a project for quite a while, but the practice notebooks of the one and only Michael Brecker have been released. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's buzzing about it. And I'm so glad to have you on the Everything Saxophone Podcast so we could talk about this, talk about how, your relationship with Michael, what's going on at the archives, all these types of things. So welcome to the Everything Saxophone Podcast, David.
Thank you. So great to be here. And yeah, this is an exciting week when this book finally came out because, we'll get to this in a second, but I am very, very lucky. I knew Mike for 30 years. We were both Joe Allard students, which, by the way, is maybe another Everything Saxophone podcast session. Joe, because there are, his students, I studied with Joe when he was 70-ish, and Mike would have studied with him a little before that in his 60s. So, there aren't that many people younger than me who studied with Joe. And it's a really unique thing. And besides teaching Mike, Joe Allard taught Dave Liebman, Bob Berg, Eddie Daniels, Pete Yellen, whole bunch of major classical players, So there's a thread that goes through the saxophone sound that is Joe.
It's a lineage when you think about it.
Yes. So Joe introduced me to Mike in 1977. And when something like that happens in your life, I was a grad student at that, but I had come to New York to go to Juilliard. And when something like that happens, even as young as I was, I realized you don't say, oh, that was cool, I got to meet Mike Brecker. You don't let that drop. So every time Mike had a gig, I would be there in New York, because Mike and Randy at that point co-owned 7th Avenue South. They had a club in New York, which is now, I think, a Chinese laundry, but it closed. Basically, there's a very telling article about the club and the whole scene, interview with Randy in Downbeat magazine, which I'm sure is online. You can get all that. But so I used to go every time I saw in the Village Voice that Mike was playing. If he was coming through with Joni Mitchell, I kept in touch. And then I left town and I taught. Before I came here to William Paterson University, I taught at the University of Maine at Augusta, which had a jazz program, for 12 years. And I kept finding excuses to bring Mike up there.
Oh, cool.
So I brought him up with steps ahead and brought him. And then, when the first album came out in 1987, and I'm sure 1,000 other people had been going, Mike, for God's sake, if you can imagine, Mike was such a giant on the scene and he'd never done a solo album. There was no such album called Michael Brecker or Mike Brecker Quartet. It just didn't exist. So finally in 1987, he calls me up and he says, well, I did it. I finally thought I was good enough to do this. Wow. And I'm going on the road and I have a quintet. And he said, I need a place to kind of get the bugs out and not get a New York Times interview. Do you have a venue? And I said, well, in Augusta, Maine, I can guarantee you two things: that you're going to get a rabid audience that will love it, and that you're not going to get a New York Times interview. So he came up, and that was the very first band, which, by the way, had Kenny Kirkland in it, right before Sting called. Kenny was in the band about 3 weeks. So it was Mike Brecker, Mike Stern, Kenny Kirkland, Jeff Andrews, and Adam Nussbaum.
Wow.
That was the band. And they basically rehearsed for 2.5 days and played a titanic concert that basically they played everything twice. They would go back and hit it again. And actually that concert, if you look over my shoulder right here, that's the poster for that concert. One of my proud moments as a young faculty member was pulling off. That was the first concert a copy of that poster also is in Mike's living room. It's
Wow.
his first concert as a leader anywhere.
Oh my gosh. Now,
Yeah.
let me just ask you something. So, at that, two questions. The rehearsals, were they closed rehearsals or open rehearsals?
It was happening all the time. So Mike was, just a word before we go. Mike, as much of an absolute monstrous presence as he was as a musician and on the saxophone, that is exceeded only by him as a person. He was one of the most generous, caring, warm people I've ever known. And he was one of those people that had the gift of making anybody, feel as though you were the most important person in his life right then. And he was all there. And he was, he was about his playing, he was humble to a fault almost.
Yeah.
You may have heard this from other people. Like, I would go back after a show and go, Mike, that was ridiculous. I want to sell my saxophone. It was great. And he'd kind of go, well, Dave, my sound really, I have to change everything. It's too bright. It's too nasal. I've got to rethink it all. I'm playing too many notes. It's too busy. I'm exploring mouthpieces. And within 5 minutes, it was kind of like, Dave, what are you playing on? What reeds? And I would say, Mike, hold it. You do not need to know what Dave Demsey is playing on. That's my line. I'm supposed to be asking you what you're exploring. He'd go, yeah, I know, right. But what are you playing on? He was constantly trying to learn from other people. Constantly. I mean, he wasn't just being a nice guy. That was the way he was, And so people need to know that, because it carried over into the way he played. That's why Pat Metheny and Herbie and Chick and all these people loved playing with him so much, because he was such a virtuoso, but he was all ears. He was all about everybody else that he was playing with. It wasn't about, now stand back, it's the Mike Brecker show. That's, I think, why he couldn't make himself put together the Michael Brecker Quintet. He didn't get it.
Yeah,
he just didn't understand why people would be interested in coming hear him play. He
was in service
felt
of the
much
music.
more comfortable in somebody else's band.
Yeah, he was in service of the music. He was in service of putting the music
and other people's music. He hadn't written that much. Writing was a laborious process for him. And part of this notebook stuff, there are also hints of tunes. There's one screen share I'll show you that's a kind of a tune to-do list.
Okay.
And there's a couple, like, for example, one of the things in that list is, I don't know how well you know Mike's recording, but there's a Brecker Brothers thing that he wrote called Bathsheba. It's kind of like a Latin, it's like that. But at the intro, it's all like synth voicing, like clusters. And he wrote a note with a bullet point that said, make a tune out of the intro to Bathsheba. And if you listen to Syzygy, if do you know that tune? It's off of one of Mike's albums. It's the same clusters 10 years later, except it's all acoustic. It's acoustic piano. Everything on that list is a to-do. It's a tune that he, in some cases, never composed, but in other cases, it became a real tune.
That's interesting, and I didn't realize that writing was laborious for him. That's interesting.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, it's just like working on these tunes," because of course he hated them.
Wow. So even
that was the way, it's like, I mean, the last notebook, which is not part of the published notebooks because it's kind of private. It's the production notes to Pilgrimage. And some of the stuff is literally 3 weeks before he died.
Right.
And he'll say, take 5 of whatever the track was, and he'd say, piano solo, fantastic. Pat guitar solo, amazing. Saxophone solo, crap.
Wow.
He's like, yeah, he's so hard on himself.
Wow.
And we have some of those outtakes. You listen to it and you go, if I could ever play a saxophone solo that did that, I'd be happy. And he just didn't use it at all, just cut it completely.
It's so interesting. I've had a number of podcast guests and the most recent one was Richard Pavlidis in Australia, who talked about Michael Brecker being his hero, and how he just, studied his music. And I could hear it in a little bit of Richard's playing for sure. And just the effect that Michael has had. And the cool thing, like you mentioned, that concert in Augusta, Maine, right? And that was his first concert as a leader. And, I was curious about like the open rehearsal type of thing. And I was asking because I was thinking, knowing like, what I've read in this book and some other things and talking with people, how humble he was, as you say, to a fault, and whether he would have permitted or felt comfortable with an open rehearsal. And the other thing too is that you mentioned with the concert, they did like 2 takes of each song, like in the concert, or were there 2 different concerts?
Yeah. Sometimes he would play, there was kind of another whole set of encores that was kind of, let's do that tune again.
Wow. Okay.
Just to get the head tightened up, And at that point, I mean, it wasn't, he was proud of that band. He was excited. And, so he wanted people to hear it. And he wanted to, he was really happy. And that was also the point at which he was really starting to experiment with the iwi.
Okay.
Which, by the way, he had throat neck problems that were caused by early in his career, 70s, I would say, early 70s. He damaged his vocal cords. I don't know if they were herniated. It was basically playing too loud with no monitors.
Yeah, I was talking with Ed Kaye for the podcast, and he was talking about the same thing. Again, another Brecker, Brecker was a hero to him, and he was talking a lot about this and, the damage that this stuff can cause. I'm sorry, so go ahead.
Yeah. And now if they did that surgery, not to get graphic, but they would go down your throat and they could do stuff microscopically. But back then they had to cut here.
Yeah.
And so in doing that, they cut a nerve. And so I'm sure you've seen demonstrations, like when he blew, his neck would inflate like right. Dizzy Gillespie's cheeks, and it hurt. And I remember him on that night of this concert in 1987 saying, it really hurts a lot to play. And this iwi, I remember him kind of quietly saying, this iwi may be the answer. I don't know how much longer I can do this playing saxophone. And of course, he figured it out. He figured it out with mouthpieces that were made more sound with less resistance. Every time we were together and I had my horn, he would say, let me try your link. Let me try your metal link. And he'd put it on and go, yeah, that's what I'm hearing. Because, he played a metal link up until 76 or so.
Right.
And then there was a period, actually, I was in New York at the same time he was, like 77 to 80. And he was playing the link on studio recordings where he didn't have to blow as hard. And then he was playing the Gardala live.
Right.
So he was kind of back and forth. And then by 1980, 81, he was pretty much playing the Gardala. And I'm sorry, I said the wrong mouthpiece. After the link, he went to the Dukov.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the Gardala. Okay.
The Miami Dukov.
Okay. I thought it was the Gardala.
Then the Dukov kind of didn't work for him after a while, and that's when he started to work with Dave Gardella a lot.
Okay. I thought it was early in that. Okay.
Yeah. So it was, he was, at the time I was in New York, anytime I would go see him, he was playing a Dukov live.
And that was 77 to 80 or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then pretty much
Like he hadn't met, or maybe he had met Dave Gardella, but I am not aware that he was working with him at all on mouthpieces. And he still had the metal link that he was going in the studio with. I've heard there are some recordings that he made during that time, even Brecker Brothers stuff, where he's playing a link.
Got it. Okay. And it makes sense in the studio. It's much more controlled. Like you said, you don't have to overblow, anything like that. All those issues that would be caused. And it's just, it's sad to hear how painful it was for him to play. I'm wondering if like after he had the surgery, how long it took him to recuperate.
Don't know. I didn't know him then. Okay. So that would have been I'm not sure when he had the surgery, but I want to say probably early 70s.
Got it.
So yeah, I don't know. And Joe used to talk about it too, Joe Allard, because I think that's one of the reasons maybe that Mike went to Joe with help with that.
Yeah. And that makes sense. That makes total sense with that.
Because Joe was all about basically tongue position, and when you play an F, be the F, that your throat, your larynx, your tongue, everything is in the same position it would be to sing that F.
Yeah.
So you're resonating at F bodily, and so Joe was all about that pre-hearing. And Mike really, you can hear it in Bob Berg's sound, Eddie Daniels' clarinet sound, Mike's sound. You can hear that there's a core there. And, pardon me, I'm getting on a soapbox here, but a lot of high baffle mouthpieces, the reason people use those is because they don't have their tongue position together. So they need to get the air squeezed somehow, and so they get the baffle to do it. Mike used to call that false brightness.
Interesting.
He said, I do have a baffle on these mouthpieces, but it's too high, and I need to get my tongue more involved and the mouthpiece less involved. And if you see the progression, you can hear it in his recordings as a leader, but if you see the progression of his mouthpieces, the later the Gardalas, the lower the baffle. And I actually have a screenshot. It's on the website too, but I have a screenshot of the mouthpiece he played on Pilgrimage. And you can see, it's not what is being sold as the Brecker model. It's a completely different thing.
You're definitely going to have to show that, or at least share that with me later, and I can.
Yeah,
I can share with the
I'll just zip through the PowerPoint, not to take everybody's time with that. But there's some great stuff, that old photographs of Mike in high school, and the band at Indiana University that got disqualified from the Notre Dame Jazz Festival. And I mean, it's a great story, all of it. So we can just zip through those, and then I have some good screenshots of some of the actual notebook pages.
Absolutely. But before we get there though, so we talked about like how you guys met, and then that concert in Augusta, Maine, and let's go further along the storyline in terms of how did you even first find out about the notebooks?
Well, the existence of this archive. I mean, I'm over here working, and every once in a while I just kind of look at this stuff and I say, how could this have happened? How could Mike not be here? He's only 6 years older than me. What is this stuff doing in Wayne, New Jersey? This stuff he should be playing tonight in Tokyo. Damn,
Yeah.
And so I knew Mike for all those years, and knew Susan, knew his wife. And maybe I should just tell you as quickly as I can how this archive ended up here.
Yes.
Because this space is the Living Jazz Archives. And this is at the part of the jazz program at William Paterson University. And our 50th year, by the way, this year, which is kind of a big deal because there were only 4 other jazz degree programs 50 years ago. Now 100 schools or more have it just in the US. But back then, jazz was something, a lot of schools had jazz bands, but jazz was something we did on the weekends when the spirits were flowing and the beer kegs were there. Heaven forbid we should actually have it in the serious curriculum. We don't. Right. Jazz is, are you minoring in alcoholism? What do you mean you're studying jazz in college? This was not done. Yeah. And even in the 70s, So anyway, Thad was the original director of jazz studies here.
Thad Jones.
And, of course, he had the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra with the great drummer Mel Lewis. When he left William Paterson and everything to go live in Denmark, it became the Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. And then when Mel died in 91, might have been 90, 91, it became the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, which still plays at the Village Vanguard every Monday night. Now, yeah. I guess it's 57 years they've been playing there.
Wow.
So when Thad got the job here, he brought some of his band members onto the adjunct faculty as well. And that, I'm very proud to say, that thread, that connection between Thad Jones, Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra, Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, that connection between that band and this program has never been broken. And even today, we have Rich Perry is one of my colleagues here, great tenor player, historically great tenor player. That, to me, vastly under-recognized giant of the tenor. And so he's here. John Mosca is involved, who was the sort of de facto leader of that band for 40 years. Jim McNeely is involved here. There's a number of Gary Smolian taught here for many years. So they came to me and said, we got a problem and we think William Paterson is the solution. And I went, well, that sounds good already. What's up? And they said, the problem is every Monday night, we're still playing on the same sheets of paper that Thad Jones gave us in 1966. And they're turning to sawdust. I mean, literally, like, it's kind of, they told a story about a guy who was subbing and he said, hey, what do I do about letter B? And they said, what do you mean? And he holds the chart up and there's like a 4-inch hole. There's nothing. The paper was just turning to dust. So they said, we have to get this stuff out of the band books and make, put it on Finale and get it modernized. And we want to have the stuff at William Paterson because that's the only place that Thad ever taught. So for a few early years, there's an archival room in our library. And, it was archival boxes that look like this.
Got it.
This is acid-free paper. All the hardware's on the outside, so it's not in the thing. And so we did that. And then Clark Terry came to us. And this sounds not related to Mike, but it actually is. Clark Terry, the great trumpeter. Yeah. And he said, I've heard what you've done with Thad stuff. I want my archive to be here. So Clark lived, thank God, to be 94. And he was a younger guy then. He was like 82. And so I worked with Clark for like 12 years on that archive. And it's really magnificent. You'll see we have some of his horns here and his whole big band book, just a whole life. And so we are 18 miles from New York City here. And one of our ongoing guests is Randy Brecker. Yeah. And Mike was here too, by the way. Not even thinking about archive. He was a healthy guy. This would have been in the 90s. And right around 2000 was the last time he was here. But Randy came back, and it was about like 3 years after Mike had passed. And Randy was a soloist I direct the big band here, the jazz orchestra, and he was a guest. And he said, while I'm here, I would like to really go see Clark's archive. I hear you have Clark Terry's archive. And he said, and I said, oh, trumpet pilgrimage, Randy? And he said, well, yes, that. Clark was one of the true giants. But he said, people don't realize I owe my whole career to Clark Terry. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, Clark heard me when both Brecker brothers were Indiana University students. Randy graduated. Mike left after a year and a half to be Mike Brecker. But he said, Clark heard me and said, look me up when you come to New York. And so he said, I did. I was 22. And he said, Clark put me in his own big band. He put me in Duke Jordan's big band. But he said, more to the point, he got me into the studio scene. And that was the late 60s for Randy. Randy's enough older than Mike. That would have been 68. Randy joined Blood, Sweat, and Tears very early. And, that was the days when, everybody was wearing a suit and tie. And we were, doing 5 sessions a day. You would do backing up Ella Fitzgerald, backing up Tony Bennett, doing a Windex commercial. And then Clark would go do the Tonight Show that night. It was like that. It was just the whole recording industry was in New York and a little bit in LA, but more in New York.
Yeah.
So Randy got involved with it. And of course, within 5 or 6 years, that whole recording industry flipped on its ear. And it became much more funk, R&B, rock, pop oriented. And, Randy was, you were still doing 5 sessions a day, but then it was with like Parliament Funkadelic, you name it, pop artists, Donna Summer, disco, and Mike got in on that. And of course, by 1974, 75, if you didn't have a decent R&B album, if you didn't have the Brecker brothers on it, they were the go-to thing. And a lot of times they're just in the background going, nobody even solos. They're just back there. They could dream up these horn parts and just make them happen in and out in an hour.
Yeah.
So Randy said, I basically owe everything to Clark. And he came over to this space and he said, and I explained the whole philosophy here is that Clark wanted to, he said, because I said to Clark, why Wayne, New Jersey, Clark? I knew the Smithsonian and Library of Congress had been courting him. And with all due respect to the fine staff there, it's, second to none at the Library of Congress. Clark said, those places are for dead people. Oh. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I want all of my stuff taken care of at the same archival level as the Library of Congress. But he said, I want a second copy of all that music on the bandstand at William Paterson. I want young students to be learning my music. I want them to be playing my horns. He said, that's my legacy. Like what he said, we're not talking about now, we're talking about 75 years from now. And he said, the parallel would be today, like Bix Beiderbecke. There's nobody alive that ever heard Bix in person. There's nobody probably that even knows anybody who knew Bix. So I remember Clark saying, soon that's going to be Charlie Parker. And then it's going to be Coltrane and Duke, and if you think about it, today, to have heard Coltrane, you would have to have been, I was 12 when Coltrane died. And I'm in my 60s. So, you'd have to be well into your 70s to have heard Train live. So it's quickly happening that it's going to age out, you know? And Clark said, that's my legacy. I want this music, my tunes, my teaching to get directly to the students that are a constantly renewing market of freshman 18-year-old students. And he said, Thank you, Clark. He said, your jazz program is one of the ones that's doing it right. You really understand the heritage of the music and the history. And so I told Randy that, and he said, we got to get Mike's stuff here. And I said, don't say that unless you mean it. That's would be massive. And Susan was, understandably, I'm sure you and your followers know the very, very agonizingly sad story of Mike's passing.
Yeah.
That he had basically a form of leukemia and they could not find a match. And it was like a steady downward decline. And so she was, I think, at that point, frozen. You know, the stuff was still on his desk in the same position it was the day he went to the hospital. And eventually, time passed and she came through that and was, as Randy said, I think I would say this if she was sitting next to me, confused, like didn't know what to do with all of this stuff that she knew belonged to the world, belonged to something. And so I said, please come out for an hour. Just give us an hour. And she did. And I told her what I just told you. And she said, like, done. This is perfect. It's an hour from the house. You know, Mike and Susan had a son and daughter. Mike's daughter lives in New York. She's a financial professional, I think. Sorry, Jess, if I missed it. And Mike's son is a police officer. In Mike's the hometown of Hastings. So a lot of people, oh, I'd love to meet Mike's son. And I said, go 45 and a 25 in Hastings. You know, you'll meet him right away. And he's a wonderful young man, fantastic guy, does a lot of fundraising projects with the police there. And so the whole family, it's not just Mike who is fabulous. The whole family is they're such great people and have such heart. And so now this material is an hour from them. It's not in whatever, Argentina or all the other places that had spoken about it. And so I'm trying to live up to that awesome, awesome is a two-used word. This is awesome because it's such a responsibility. Like, what do I do? And I see Susan not often enough, but every 6 or 8 months. And one of our conversations, I said, we have some of Mike's mouthpieces here. We have all this sheet music here, photographs, probably 2,000, 2,500 gig tape recordings. I mean, Mike was a keeper. He studied his own playing a lot. So there'd be entire tours where it's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, a tape of every gig. And I said, with all of that, people want to see the notebooks. They
That's
come and they say, where are the note? This is all great, Dave. Where are the notebooks? And I said, you really ought to consider publishing them. And so several publishers kind of nosed around, and it didn't work. And then Chuck Scher got in contact. Scher Music, and of course SHER, Scher Music, and he's the guy who published the new Real books. And that was just a gigantic, massive job. If you can only imagine, never mind the engraving and getting all those hundreds and hundreds of tunes right, but the copyright stuff, because the original Real book, as I'm sure you know, you're not old enough, but the original Berkeley-based Real book was illegal.
Yes.
It was just, a guy sold it out of his trunk of his car, and it was I'm from Boston, so I know this history. I didn't go to Berkeley. I mean, I studied with Joe Viola there as a high school kid, so I was around, and he said, yeah, you got to get this Real book. This guy's on the corner of Tremont and, Mass Ave between 3 and 4, and there'd be a guy there, you want a book? Yeah, sure. It was weird. It was like a drug deal or something. That's how we sold them. So Chuck did it. he accomplished it and did the new real book. And the fact that he wanted to do this, I went to Susan and said, here's your guy. This is the guy. He's got the honesty and the integrity and the musicianship. He's a great musician himself, and the tenacity to do this. Because the problem is, if you can call it a problem, it's 800 pages.
Yeah.
Of, like, do this in all keys. Except, as Larry says in the preface, except there's a wrong note in there. And it's a wrong note because, Mike was just like jotting it down for himself. He wasn't thinking about proofing it.
Right.
So there'd be this thing that goes up by minor thirds, except you go up a minor third the third time and there's a note that doesn't transpose right. And so you say, is this right? Did Mike mean to do this? Or is this actually just a glitch? So, Larry Dunlap had to make all those countless decisions, and they would come back to me and say, should this be in here? Also, there are 8 notebooks, and 2 of the notebooks, one of them is almost entirely transcribed tunes, other people's tunes. And another one is almost entirely transcribed solos. And so, we came to the decision, we don't need to see Michael Brecker's transcription of Giant Steps, because by the time it gets engraved, it's the same as your transcription of Giant Steps. It's, and we don't need to see Mike's transcription of Coltrane's Liberia or Moment's Notice, the tune, because then you're going to be paying the Coltrane estate royalties, and all you're doing is seeing the fact that Mike wrote it down. It's still the same notes. So we just made the decision to just strike it, not include it.
Got it.
And then there's another entire notebook, and I know some people, this will burst a gasket for some people, but it's all of the original knob settings for the Steiner phone. The predecessor to the EWI.
Okay, a whole notebook
because
on that?
Mike worked with Niles Steiner. I mean, it's sitting right over there, the instrument. But it's all the knob settings to get the sounds that he was, it's a 200-page book. And every page is a photocopy of all the knobs with no line. And then either Niles Steiner or Mike would draw in like, oh, this knob is at 10 o'clock and this knob's at 2 o'clock. And then it's all the settings. And we didn't publish that either because it's Mr. Steiner's work and it's a different subject than this. And then some of the pages in the notebooks would have one thing. It would say, October 30th, 1978, 4 bars, play this in all keys. There's no reason to give that a full page in the printed notebook. So a lot of it got condensed. So in the end, it's 800 pages condensing down to 150.
Right. Okay. And how long did it take you?
I made the decision. I had the idea, rather, of saying, rather than including all these transcribed solos and transcribed tunes, let's just make a list as an appendix and say, these are the tunes that Mike transcribed. These are the solos that Mike transcribed. So that then people know what the important thing wasn't seeing his handwritten transcription. I mean, it's sure is cool to sit here and see it, but once you publish it, it loses that immediacy. The important thing is, what was Mike working on? And so that list is in the book as a transcription. I mean, as an appendix, sorry.
Got it. Let me ask you this. How long did it take? You found these notebooks, right? Well, actually, yeah. All right. We'll talk about that in a second. But you found these notebooks, these 8 notebooks. You made the executive decision that 2 of them, one of them, the transcriptions and stuff like that, it's valuable, but valuable in a different way. And then you're
Right.
paying royalties to other foundations and stuff, and then the Steiner phone and whatever. But how long did it take you to go from the 6 notebooks to the published version? How many years?
Well, that was Larry. Oh no, it wasn't years. It was months. Larry,
okay.
Larry
Wow.
and Chuck Scherer, they did this past spring.
That's incredible.
Yes. And I knew that's the way Chuck worked. He said, I would get an email and Chuck would go, "We're on it, Dave. I'm going to have questions for you." And every other day there'd be like, "Here, check this out." And he would send me a screenshot of something and say, "Should we include this? I don't, this is not just 4 bars of Joe Henderson. This is a page of Joe Henderson." And I would go, "No, just add that to the appendix and say he transcribed this Joe Henderson solo." So it was kind of making a million little decisions, but I want to be clear, Larry and Chuck did the work. I was kind of sitting back here in Wayne, New Jersey going, "Yeah, include that. Oh yeah, include that. Don't include that." They were, Larry did just an amazing job of doing this layout and the engraving.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to see it. First time I saw the book, it just hit me how much work they had put in.
That's why I said how many years, because
yeah,
oh my gosh, not months. Wow. And when people see the book, they'll understand. I mean, there's so much in it. There really is just so much in it.
It's literally a life.
Yeah.
It's a life.
Yeah.
The early stuff, I mean, I can run us through it for the people that don't have it. I have a digital copy of it. The early S notebook is Mike while he was at Indiana, and even before that, because some of it is on Berkeley. These were, wire-bound manuscript notebooks, same as you and I would buy in a music store. And it was on Berkeley paper. All the pages said, Berkeley Press. So, and Mike did either one or maybe 2 summers of the Berkeley summer camp. That would have been in 67, 68. Darn. I have the chronology and I didn't write it down, but let's just say late 60s, because he graduated in 67. So it would have been more like 66. And he also did a camp called the Ramblerny Summer Camp that Phil Woods ran. It was a camp out in Pennsylvania. Mike grew up in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania, sort of north of Philly, just north of Philadelphia. And so this would have been, a couple hours north of them in the Pocono Mountains. And Phil tells some great stories about having Mike there, because in the same sax section was Richie Cole was in that section. And just a second, they recorded an album.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That I think is on YouTube. And the sax section was Roger Rosenberg. I mean, great baritone player. Yeah, Richie Cole, Mike Brecker, Lou Markowitz, who also had a career, Ed Cottle, Holly Neer, who had a major career as a folk singer, but she was the featured vocalist in this thing. Rick Chamberlain, who was a major figure on the Pocono jazz scene.
Wow, so the album is called New Hope for Jazz?
Yes. It was in New Hope, Pennsylvania, if you get it.
Yeah.
So there's New Hope for Jazz. And this was, wait a minute, 66. Yeah, okay. The front cover, it says Ramblerny 66. And it has just a kind of a, not a great idea to have this that's a performance photo, but it's like, these are the last known photos of these people before they disappeared. It's kind of hard to see. But what's most telling is you see the band in the back. You can see the whole band, and then you can see them by section.
Yeah.
So the sax section.
There we go.
See, Mike is long, tall Mike. He's about 6'2", 3 in high school. Wow. He was a very tall guy. So there he stands in the back, with the other guys. So, yeah, we got a copy of this. I think Holly Neer's manager was selling it, and I saw it on eBay and went, whoa, grab it, boom, But I'm not sure if it's on YouTube or not. It should be. Because one beautiful thing is, they play, and Mike has a couple of solos, and Phil was a hardcore bebop guy, and a lot of the arrangements are his, but the last tune on the first side is like a modal blowing thing, and it's all Mike. And Phil, I think, I never asked him about it. I'm still in the band that was Phil Wood's big band. I was lucky to be there for 2 years. Now it's called the Water Gap Jazz Orchestra because it's in Delaware, Water Gap, PA, right on the PA New Jersey line. There's a very famous club called the Deerhead Inn, where Keith Jarrett started there, and a lot of famous players lived out there or lived there. So anyway, Phil wrote a chart because he could see, even at that stage, that Mike was all about Coltrane. And so, he just lets Mike let it rip. And it's not under control yet, but even now you hear that and you go, whoa, who's that kid? If that recording were made last week, you go, whoa, that kid has some potential. That's some stuff happening. And Mike would have been 16.
Okay.
Then. And then he shows up at Indiana. And, the rest is history. He was in a band there. And again, I can take you through. Do you want me to do a screen share? I can kind of talk you through those.
Yeah, let's go there. Let's do that.
Years.
All right, cool. So I'm really excited we get a chance to check out this PowerPoint with a whole bunch of, there's a whole bunch of stuff on here, but you said you had some old pictures here?
I do. Yeah, like for example, the Cheltenairs from Cheltenham, there's, can you see this arrow?
Yeah.
So there's Mike. Probably that would be 65. So he would have been 65, 49, 59, 16.
Yeah, 16. So those of you that are listening to the podcast, I'm going to really encourage you to watch the video for this.
Yeah. And so that's Cheltenham High School. And then here's Mike playing at the Notre Dame Jazz Festival. And the great story is that they were, this is, by the way, the trumpeter standing next to him is Randy Sankey, Sandke, great trumpeter who's had a major career, continues to. He was sort of the leader of the band, or maybe he and Mike were co-leaders, and they played and basically got into the finals and were the acknowledged best band. And then they came out and their final tune was like a rock tune, a rock jam. And the judges were so upset by this that they disqualified him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we have audio of that performance, and the tunes before that, I can't remember. Mike plays this beautiful ballad. I mean, it was a jazz thing. And then all of a sudden they go, za da 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 za za, and the whole thing changes, like super loud. And it's about a 15-minute jam on this tune.
Oh, wow.
This did not go over well with the judges. So anyway, the 1969 Notre Dame Festival, Mike was there for 3 semesters. He was an art major.
Got it.
At Indiana. And actually, this is from the notebooks. This is Mike's Indiana U class schedule.
Oh, how
You
cool.
see Spanish 5 days a week, drawing, art history, and then it's got jazz. That's probably, he was in one of the jazz bands.
And then art history. Okay, cool.
And you see, flute and sax. This was his practice window here. But I think he was playing gigs and yeah. And this band, by the way, that you just saw earlier, this band ended up going to Chicago with a record contract that never materialized, but they were in Chicago the summer of 1968, which, if you know, it's like the Democratic Convention, the Chicago police. It was like a police state there. If you had long hair, you were going to get the heck beat out of you just on the street. It was a rough summer, and it suffice to say, it didn't work out well.
Wow.
Yeah, it was not a good thing. And Mike came back the following fall to Indiana, but then he went to New York. And this band actually transformed into a professional band. It was named after a very much apparently disliked battle axe lady who worked in the student cafeteria, whose name was Mrs. Seaman. So this name, and this is their publicity photo. You can see they're in a series of men's room stalls here. That's their, and then this is the entire band. And this gentleman right here, whoops, I moved the whole thing. I can't highlight it without moving it. This was a bust of the former president of IU.
Okay.
And they put a beret on the statue and had a cigarette hanging out of its mouth and put a jacket around it and made him part of the band.
That's hysterical.
So God. You can see the whole spirit was irreverence. I was at Indiana U in the president's office 3 or 4 years ago, trying to track down the location of this bust, which is in the president's office. And one of the secretaries sees this publicity thing and she goes, "Oh, this looks like trouble to me." These guys were, and they were all brilliant students, but they were just out to basically be counterculture guys,
Yeah.
And of course,
wow.
There's Mike. And there's Mike in the first men's room stall closest to you.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And here's the band. Oh, I can't move it. Here's the band on a gig. One of their biggest gigs was a Eugene McCarthy rally. He was running against Nixon. He was the Democrat running against Nixon. So there was a gigantic rally at Dunn Meadow on the Indiana U campus. And this is Mike playing the tenor solo. The band, Mrs. Seaman's Sound Band was the name of the band. And they were one of the featured musical acts at this rally. And there are a few pictures looking over the band's shoulders out into the meadow. I mean, there were thousands of people there. It was a huge crowd.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is Mike as an Indiana U freshman, spring of his freshman year. You can see from high school, the hair's gotten longer. He's still a rail thin,
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is 3 years later in Dreams. And a saxophone note, that's a master link. Those 4-star master links, the real early Auto-Link mouthpieces. And he used the Selmer. Selmer unfortunately stopped making those ligatures. But Joe Allard used to say, they fit all the link mouthpieces perfectly. And they were made for a Selmer metal jazz tenor mouthpiece, but that nobody ever played. But everybody bought the ligature. And now about 3 or 4 years ago, they stopped making the ligature, and now they sell for way too much money on eBay. But you could get them for, $20.
Wow.
And they held the reed better than a link ligature. Link ligatures. The early ones were beautiful, and then later links kind of made the ligatures were good mouthpiece with a cheap ligature. Excuse me. Bad publicity for link there, but I think that's common knowledge at this point. Mike practicing. I love this photo. Basically, Mike practicing in some hotel room somewhere.
Yeah.
Probably 70s. Yeah, not 80 yet. And this is the link. This is a later link. Played a silver plated, like a 6-star for a while. Yeah, but that's the horn. That's the horn that we'll see later.
Okay, got it.
And and then this is some of the sheet music we have here. I'm off the subject now, but I'm bringing this out because this is unbelievable. This is the original ink copy of Some Skunk Funk, which actually Brecker trivia question, what was the first recorded appearance of some Skunk Funk? It was not on a Brecker Brothers record. It was 6 months earlier on a Billy Cobham record called The Funky Thide of Sings. Thide, a Funky Thide of Sings. And it features Mike all the way through. Mike takes both solo slots. It's just Mike blowing. And the two notes, I don't know if you know the expression goof tape, but back in the day, I can't blow this up. But right here, there's actually a patch where whoever it was who copied it made a mistake. And it's like a patch of blank notebook paper. If your mistake was so heinous that whiteout would not help, then you put one of these patches of goof tape over it and you could just start over again. And the original horn section on that Billy Cobham album was Randy on trumpet, Mike on tenor, and Glenn Ferris on trombone. So you see right up here, it says 2 alto.
Oh, yeah.
So it means that when they went to the Brecker Brothers version, this became Dave Sanborn's part. And Mike played, a lot of it's unison, but like right here. Beep. Unison in force. So a lot of it was harmonized, and Mike took over the trombone part.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. And that's just a great artifact. I remember I was with Randy when we found it, and he went, "Holy crap, that's the original paper we read off. Oh, my God." Mike saved it, and it's his tune, but he didn't have this copy, It's kind of a great moment. Randy going, "Oh, my God, 1975. I haven't seen this since then."
Wow.
And then other old photo. There's actually a new old CD of the Brecker Brothers that just came out. The Bottom Line Club had sound archives that they hadn't told anybody about for 40 years. And one of them was a Brecker Brothers gig. And the audio comes from on this it's newly released. It's probably 3 years ago this CD came out. And it's amazing. It's really great. Mike sounds so great. And this photo is from the archive, but it ended up on the CD. So this photo, if somebody has that CD, this will be familiar. But that's Luther Vandross. These guys were studio singers. That's Patty Austin. It's kind of Will Lee, who was the bassist, of course, on the Letterman Band forever. Yeah, it was kind of an all-star group, but they weren't stars then. Nobody knew who they were,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
The Brecker Brothers.
Yeah.
And then a little later, this is on tour with Joni Mitchell. This is one of the things we have in the archive is 800 color slide negatives, mostly taken by Mike. So it's slightly frustrating that Mike is not on many of them because Mike took the pictures. But this is Jocko backstage. This is from the Joni Mitchell Shadows and Light tour.
Okay.
I don't know if you know that record, but it's a fabulous record. It's the band. It's the music of Mingus with Joni Mitchell. And then the band is Mike, Jocko, Pat Metheny, Lyle Mays, Don Elias.
Yeah, it's just incredible. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And the album was called Shadows and Light. And there's a great YouTube video of one of the cuts. They also did a video, and it's called Dry Cleaner from Des Moines, which is a Mingus blues. And Mike and Jocko basically, Mike and Joni trade choruses. There's no changes. So it's just Don Elias, Jocko just walking his brains out and doing all these bing, all these amazing harmonics and everything. And it's Joni sings a chorus, Mike plays a chorus, getting more and more out and more virtuosic every chorus. It's a really amazing recording.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
My favorite part of that recording of the video is Joni starts with just the drums. And she walks out to the stage, to the front, and all of a sudden she goes, "Oh," and she runs back, and Mike goes, boom, like she forgot to get the first note. And Joni like says something to Mike and he goes, boom. And then she goes, got it. And then she goes out to the microphone. But it's on stage at, I think, in Santa Monica Civic Center, I think.
Oh, cool.
So that's, yeah. And now we get into the notebooks. And this is, there's 800 of these pages, if people have not seen them yet. This is what Chuck and Larry Dunlap had to deal with. I mean, it's,
wow.
You know, different, taking this idea and moving it by minor thirds, moving it by major thirds. See this? Down minor thirds, down major thirds, up in major thirds, up in minor thirds. Just taking this idea as a 4-note cell and moving it.
Yeah, got it. And they took this and they had to typeset it, and that's wow,
yeah,
that's
times 800.
Oh my God, there's so much work.
And you can see how, Mike was meticulous. March 10th, 1980. This would have been right around the time of the 80-81 album with Pat Metheny, Brecker Brothers, Détente, or maybe Heavy Metal Bebop. No, that was earlier. Anyway, yeah, you can see what Mike was working on. Then here's a lot of it's just like 2 5s. D minor to G7 to C. Just like you and I do, except it's Mike.
Yeah. Yes.
And here's another. Here's 2 5 and F. Basic. And oh yeah, this is actually classic. Basic module. And then he uses it here, starts something like it here, uses it here, and then he takes this same thing and moves it by intervals. It's like you can see him. I remember I was hosting one of his clinics once, and he said to the students, it was at William Paterson, and he goes, all right, give me 4 random notes. And they just, 4 people raised their hand, and he took the 4 notes and he plays the 4 notes. And then he says, okay, now let's take that up by half steps. And he goes, beat and do dee, beat and do dee, do and do dee, do. And he does it 4 or 5 times, sort of at that tempo. And then all of a sudden it goes light speed. And he goes, like up to the top of the horn into the altissimo. And the whole audience cracks up because it's just so impossible what he had just done. And he laughs too. And he goes, I know you're all laughing because I don't need to repeat it that many times. He didn't get it. He didn't understand that he had just blown everybody's mind by taking 4 notes that somebody else had given him, and he did it slowly. And then he just, it would be at 16th notes, like it was at that tempo up into the altissimo.
Crazy.
You just realize how many thousands of hours he must have practiced every possible 4-note permutation up and down the horn by intervals.
Yeah.
And 2 5s. This is how you use it over 2 5s, and this is how you use it. I remember once I asked Mike, it's a very naive question, and he gave me a very beautiful answer. I said, when you're playing outside, what do you think about? And he looks at me and he goes, there is no outside. Everything's in. I'm just thinking of a chord progression that superimposes over what the band is doing. And then he paused a second and he goes, going out is easy. Getting back in is the problem. And it's like, that kind of nails the entire post-Coltrane era right there. Because there's some kind of major players who lived out. They play out all the time, and it never connects to what the rhythm section's doing. It's just kind of free, and that's great. But to me, what Mike was doing and what all those other players, you talk about Joe Lovano and Rich Perry and Kenny Garrett and that in a way is somehow more sophisticated, because here's the rhythm and you're like touching, you're coming back in and you're weaving in and around that,
Yeah.
Practice list. I don't even, this is 1973. So this is quite early. Top lip out. That's a Joe Allard thing where you use your upper lip to seal the corners and you leave this lower lip kind of flat, not to get into Joe's stuff again.
Right. No, I'm familiar with Joe's stuff.
Sight read. 15, what's it say? 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Technique, long tones, chromatic, interval. Yeah, it's like a to-do list. And this is all in the notebook too. There's a whole bunch of to-do practice lists. And then I don't know Weldon Irving. I'm drawing a blank on that because it's the great player Jerry Weldon, but he's younger than Mike. So in 1973, he would have been Mike. And he's from Philly too. Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, there's like a pitch series, overtones. Yeah, it's literally endless. You could take this page or this last page, and that's a month. For him, it was a day, Okay, moving forward.
Yeah.
After he started teaching, there's some of these clinic outlines.
I see. Okay.
My background, jazz, improv, melody, a learned language, starting with transcribed licks, modal playing, R&B playing, intervals, start with the blues. He writes out of B-flat blues. He did this more and more, thank God. The North Texas Clinic is a really nice one. That's on YouTube. But we have video of a 1-hour version that he did here that's truly amazing. Talks about Joe and also, by the way, self-promotion here, but I'm not getting anything out of it. I did a really great interview with Mike on a magazine called Saxophone Journal.
Oh, great. Yeah.
That's still available online. And it was in 1987. And I think the reason it worked so well was because I didn't ask him, "Oh, Mike, tell me about your new album." I said, "How do you practice? What's a typical day for you? How did you learn the language?" It was for sax. And he would go, "Oh, that's a total geek question." How? And I said, "Yes, this album, it's kind of a magazine version of your website."
Yeah. Yeah.
Except there were no websites back then in 87.
That's right. That's right. It's a great magazine. Great magazine.
Yeah, it is a great magazine. Yeah. I wrote for them. I had a new saxophone publications column in every issue. I knew Ken Dorn, who just died about a year and a half ago. And so I was involved in that. But to me, this was one of the best interviews I ever did.
That's
Mike
really cool.
was so great. It was at his apartment. And continuing on. Oh, this is the composition ideas. It's interesting. Bass clarinet on strap hanging bass line. I never knew that he played clarinet as a very young kid. I don't know if he's talking about him or talking about having somebody in to play it. Strap hanging, do you know that album?
No.
Sorry, Strap Hanging was a Brecker Brothers album. And there was an electric bass line. And it was this real kind of complicated swinging funk bass line with all these slash chord Brecker changes over the top of it. It's really great. And so he's talking about it, doing some other version of that.
That's cool.
Yeah, he's got a bunch of things with bass clarinet.
I gotta check that out.
Funkadelic, F minor, funkadelic backgrounds, bass clarinet, exclamation point. Make tune from new fingerings. By the way, there's a lot of altissimo and multiphonic fingerings in the book.
I saw that. Yeah, it's in the appendix.
Yeah, that was a puzzle because we couldn't figure out where the code came from. We all know the fingerings with the 3 and the 3 on top, but back to Ken Dorn. Ken Dorn published a book of multiphonic fingerings in the 70s that used an entirely different code to specify the fingerings. And I could not find that book. I had it. I actually ended up paying too much money to buy an old copy on eBay to get it.
Oh, wow. In order to figure that out. Got it. Yeah.
So that's where it came. We had to translate it. And yeah, Making Strap Hang and Bathsheba, Ethiopia. I don't know either. So this would have been like right around that, the Strap Hanging album. And I don't know either. Well, that's all in the Strap Hanging album. Not Ethiopia is another. It's like a modal tune. I'd sing the line, but I wouldn't come out well. But I love that album. It's great.
Cool.
And see, this is the one. Make Bathsheba intro into tune.
Right. What you mentioned before.
That became Syzygy. Cool. This would be now, maybe 6 or 7 years later. Jim Pepper chords. I'm blanking on that. I know that name. It's not Art Pepper. I don't know who it is. Yeah. And so African tune, African Skies, I would bet it ended up. One of the main sounds on African Skies is kind of this synth bass clarinet sound.
Got it.
Another Brecker, that's a return of the Brecker Brothers era tune, like 94, 95. But this would have been earlier. This would have been, I think, I'm sorry.
1981.
It was 81. Yeah. So that was maybe 12 or 13 years later. He went back and followed his own advice. It's pretty amazing. I included this page. It's hard to read because this right here is one of the best pieces of advice. Practice time in fingers, no tonguing. In other words, people that have good time, it's because they have good hands. And I did one, at one point, I had known Mike for a long time at this point. And I called him up and I said, I'm kind of going crazy because you've maybe heard me play for 10 minutes and I need your help. I need to get together for some hours and really read me the riot act, go ahead, which of course he could never do. But one of the things we did, which was so humbling, was, he's a big guy. So he stood behind me and he said, okay, just blow into your mouthpiece. I had my tenor on, and he reached around and put his hands on my keys and played. So it was like my sound, but his chops. And then we reversed it, and it was his horn, and I reached around and played my totally mortal ideas with his sound. Very depressing experience. Especially the one where I'm blowing and it's my sound and my horn, but it's all that ridiculous stuff that we all hear. In other words, and I was just going, I wasn't tonguing at all. It was just hands. The time in his hands was just so spectacularly on it,
Yeah.
So that's great advice. Let's go to the notebook.
All right, and here's the new publication that just came out in June 2023. So let's talk a little bit about this. So you showed us the handwritten versions, and now we're going to see the published versions and how cleaned up and neat, and just the sheer amount of work that went into this.
Yes. So this is the cover, and the index got a lot of great people that endorsed it. I mean, amazing people.
Yeah, no question about that. Yeah.
Susan and Chris Potter, but also, Maria Schneider.
Right.
Richie, Alan Pasquin. So the table of contents, this is important. The first book you'll see is basically basic stuff. These are the modes. These are piano voicings for a 2/5. This is the major and minor scales, major minor chords. I think that it's Indiana University, and there may be some stuff from Berkeley in there too.
Yeah, there was some basic theory I noticed in there. I was
Yeah.
surprised by that
Yes.
when I saw that, because I was expecting everything to be like, full tilt. So, you know,
He was 18. It was
yeah.
full tilt, and some of the stuff, you're looking at it in the book, you'll see, a Bach chorale written with a B plus on it with a lot of red ink from the faculty. And then on the other page, it's like a Coltrane transcription. It's like he had both lives going at the same time.
Yeah,
Being a
yeah.
music theory student and practicing all night, probably.
I'm
Then book
sure.
2 in New York, and then this is the early 70s, and then he's in New York. That page we just looked at is from book 4, and then it goes all the way through. And then the lead sheets and transcribed solos, it's more of a list of lead sheets and transcribed solos.
Right, right.
And then I really am glad that he gave the reader 4 or 5 pages from the original notebooks, like what this stuff originally looked like.
Yeah, because even just looking at the pictures that you showed over here was really interesting. As I'm scrolling through my own version on my computer, and I'm looking through those sample pages and stuff like that. It is fascinating to look at it. It really is.
It is. It's amazing. And to also know that his handwriting was so precise. If there is a glitch in there, you can tell. You can't. There's no moment where you look and you go, "What note is this?" It's very his penmanship, his manuscript is beautiful. He wouldn't agree, I'm sure, but it is.
No, I agree with you. Totally.
So it's this transcriptions, probably intervals, melodic minor scales in thirds. You're saying, well, what is this good? Any student that says, yeah, but I want to learn like Mike Brecker. And I say, well, can you do this at like, can you do it that fast? If you can't do it up to speed, then go to this page. It's not as basic as you think it is.
Right.
A to-do list, 1967. Senior in high school or freshman at Indiana.
Right, right.
Licks from I Want to Talk About You. Coltrane, by the way. And see here, this is just basic theory stuff. Because you take it out of Mike's handwriting and put it in, and it looks like another Chuck Scher music book.
Exactly. That's
Except it's through Mike.
Yeah.
Rhythm changes, chord patterns. That's great advice for a writer. Any 5 can be preceded by its 5 of 5. And any chord can be preceded by its 5. That whole secondary dominant, not just as a writer, but as a player.
Yeah.
So it just continues on. And then let's go to book 2. And this starts, now you start to see technical trills, half step and whole step trills. And what he means is do that all the way down to the low part of the horn, trilling on every note.
And then fingering exercises.
One of my teachers called these finger busters.
Yes, because they definitely are.
Pinky stuff.
Yeah.
Like this. Very few players could, and Mike could just go like a machine.
Yeah.
E flat to C, where you have to roll the pinky.
Yeah.
Long tones. Made long tone exercises for himself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I mean, it's not rocket science.
No, it's foundational stuff.
Yes.
Foundational stuff.
Double tonguing.
This is
starting to work on double tonguing, which he didn't really use as a mature player. I don't really hear him do it much, but he practiced it.
Yeah.
Press hard, he's saying. Press the keys. Very interesting. The advice he's giving to himself.
And what was 5 to 58?
Yeah, there was once, I'm sorry?
What's at number 10? What's 5 to 58? What am I missing there? You see that before press hard?
Yep. I don't know.
Yeah,
I would have to go to the notebook and look it up.
okay, yeah, because I was looking, beforehand, and I'm just trying to figure that out. But
See, like this kind of playing, like he
yeah,
wasn't capable of that 2 years earlier.
yeah,
So basically he's playing 4-octave, he's got the altissimo happening. That doesn't show up in the books. We just know that he figured it out.
yeah. But it's interesting
Yeah.
that you just said that showed up, 2 years lader. People have to understand that are, obviously watching this, this is not an overnight, thing that's going to happen. You're going to get the book. You're going to get into his mind. You're going to get some of these exercises. It doesn't mean that, you're going to get this down in a week. You know what I mean? This is his life's legacy, so to speak. It's going to take that one
Yeah.
exercise, number 10 right there. That would take months
Yes.
if you do it right.
Yes. And I mean, as I said in the preface, we need to add that Mike would be completely somewhere between mystified and amused that all of us are so interested in this. He would not understand why any of us cared at all about what he was working on.
Yeah,
And to that effect, I would say, you take a pattern like that or like this, and you say, okay, what was Mike thinking? Now you make up your own pattern that's based on that. Don't just, here's a Mike Brecker lick, because it isn't a Mike Brecker lick. It's just an intervallic thing that he was working on. So listen to that. It's basically half steps, fifths. It's like an intervallic lick. He calls it a 2-5, but maybe with a C sharp over a D7, I don't know. It's more taking his, like here's an intervallic thing. Like alter that and make it your own. Now I remember when I first met Mike, one of the first times I said, well, I really want to tell you I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm transcribing all your solos and everything. And he looked at me and he goes, that's very nice. Thank you. I appreciate that. Stop doing that. Don't do that. And I kind of went, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. And he goes, no, you don't understand. He said, the problem is if you do that, all you're going to be is one more guy who is a clone of me. If you do that your whole life, you'll just become some guy that people say, oh, that guy sounds like Mike Brecker. Hey, let's go hear Mike Brecker. But he said, if you listen to the people that I listen to, you become my peer. And that's a beautiful statement to make. Very, very well thought through. I use that statement with countless students because, at that point, everybody was imitating Mike. And then 10 years later, everybody's imitating Joe Lovano and Kenny Garrett. The names change, but the process is the same. Yeah. Every young student gets excited about the music because of some hero, and they decide, I want to be him or her. Yeah. But Mike said, don't do that. And I remember telling Mike that I used that phrase, and he goes, I said that? That's really good. I said that. And I said, yeah. That's so awesome. Yeah, you just see the intervallic stuff he's coming up with. And this is early. He was basically 19 or 20 doing this. And it's just hundreds of pages of this.
Yeah, just some of the ideas and how he's using it, how he's perceiving it too.
Yeah, and by the way, a lot of diminished stuff.
I noticed that. Yeah,
he does this, and then he goes, or better yet. Yeah, and he says, this says it right here. That lick works over all 4 of these dominant chords. Like any diminished thing works in 4 keys. And there's tons of diminished stuff. Just tons of it.
For this part. Yeah, for this part of the book. Yeah. Later on, I noticed the Lydian augmented.
Right. More
stuff.
altered stuff.
Yeah.
Train blue. I don't even know what. I'm sure within 2 weeks, somebody will figure out what Coltrane's solo this was. But I didn't see it until today.
That would be
It's
great. And
very,
if they do, they should actually we should tell them how to contact you when you
that
think
would
about
be
that.
great to have like a an online document, like page 32, exercise 5. This solo shows up on in this record. That would be actually great to do.
Yeah.
You know. And by the way, while I was just looking through these notebooks, so one day I'm at Susan's. I would go, as I said, I'd go over to visit her from time to time, and she's found more stuff. And we had loaded stuff. It was mostly manuscripts, because we have all of the music, the actual pages from every solo album, all the Brecker Brothers music, a lot of steps ahead. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of handwritten stuff, or the stuff that was actually at the recording session. So we had done that, and I had literally 1 foot out the door, and all of a sudden she comes to me with this notebook, and she said, "By the way, do you want these?" And I said, "What is that?" And she said, "It's a notebook. It's just got stuff, music stuff in it." And I went, "What? Like, how many of these do you have?" And she said, 7 or 8. And I just went, it's the Holy Grail. Because Mike, at every clinic, every time he and I talked, he would like, "So you're keeping a journal, right?" That's what he called them. "You're keeping a journal, write everything down. You get a good idea, you're on a gig and something happens, write it down. You hear a solo on a record, write it down. Don't allow because it'll slide out of your memory." And I said, "Oh my God, you have these?" And she said, "Oh, so these are," she's not a musician. She said, "I thought maybe they'd be important." And I said, "They're not important. These are like
Monumental.
So yeah, so we had already had the archive for a year or two before these showed up. So my hope is that, I'm there and she goes, "Hey, guess what? I found 10 more."
Mm.
Hello, Chuck. It's volume 2. So yeah, this is what we got right now. But
That's awesome. If we could
then
take
later
a
on,
quick scan.
yeah, later on the ideas get more, they get longer, they get more involved. This is book 3.
Some St. Thomas licks.
Sonny Rollins, St. Thomas licks. I mean, I've had these notebooks literally in my hands for 4 or 5 for 4 or 5 years, and some of this I've never seen before.
Yeah, because there's so much, or you've seen it, but then you're seeing something else in it,
Right. And just like, like here. Notice the way he's going to the tritone substitute.
Yeah.
It's just that is right there. Is, if you don't understand tritone substitutes, that one line right there will teach you. He never uses the word tritone substitute, but it's like, that's it. That's a beautiful way, the way he slides from the G sharp to the G and then the G to the F sharp. It's almost like that's inserted. That line could have gone A, G sharp, F sharp. But instead, he inserts this. It's just beautiful the way he does it.
Yeah.
And who knows, if he were sitting here, he may say, "Yeah, and it's not my lick either. I stole it from blah, blah, blah." I don't know. He doesn't, For dominant 7 flat 9 chords, think a whole step above minor 2. That's the altered scale. Oh, wait. No. I'm thinking of a whole step above the root of the dominant. He's saying whole step. Okay. So he's saying
use the E major triad. Oh, but that's the whole step over the D minor 7. So
right,
using the E major.
Right.
And he's just using.
Yeah.
For a second. Yeah, just enharmonics.
Sorry, I went to another idea which shows up later.
Yeah.
And he shows how to do it in different keys. Sonny. And there's tons. He took licks from everybody. Mike Stern, guys in his band, Joey Calderazzo, George Garzone. There's some Eric Alexander licks in here, which I was very pleased to be able to tell Eric we're in here. There's a there's just stuff from, I don't want to mention players because I'm going to leave people out. But obviously, Joe Henderson, Stanley Turrentine, Dexter, tons of Coltrane. It's everybody. Stan Getz, rock and D minor. Fake C and then the fake D. That's the harmonic thing, the long tone thing that he played.
Oh, so he called it fake. Okay, got it.
That's what he called them, fakes.
Instead of the harmonic. Okay, interesting.
You know that lick that Mike played? It was chromatic, it goes like chromatically up, where he plays. The way it works is he plays a regular fingering, like let's say he plays F, then he plays the harmonic of F, then he goes up a half step and plays the harmonic of G, then the regular fingering of G, then the regular fingering of A flat harmonic. So it's like this cross rhythmic thing as he goes up. And he showed it to me and I said, my God, how long did it take you to get that proficient? And he said, about 2 weeks. And I said, how could you possibly learn that in 2 weeks? And he goes, no, Dave, you don't understand. That's all I did for 2 weeks, 10, 12 hours a day. I just played this idea.
Wow.
Kind of went, okay. Like, I get it. Not just that he was that talented, but, being that good. It's more about having a work ethic and having an ability to concentrate on like this one idea for 6 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's for a lot of people, it's unfathomable to be able to do that.
Well, especially in today's society where, our attention spans are so much less. So,
right.
To have that kind of focus.
Right. And I'm going to scroll quickly here because people got to buy it. You ought to just buy this.
There's just so much in this. And
don't stop this and take screenshots. Buy the book. It's just, it'll change your life.
Yeah, for sure. And there's so much more even than just the patterns in here, there's, and we don't need to show it, but, just to say in terms of some of the input from some of the other people that, praised the book, and also, some input in terms of like, practicing and whatnot. And just even the listings of, where was it? I just missed it over
practice. Basically to-do lists. See, here you go. Giving away Sonny Rollins fingerings.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like I said, there's so much more to this. There's also, in one of the appendixes, he goes over fingerings, some altissimo fingerings. Also, he calls it saxophone specific exercises, but we're not going to show it here because we do want people to buy the book. This way, you support all the efforts put in by everybody that was involved.
Joe Allard. No, wait, I don't think so. Not Joe Allard. Sorry. That's Joe Henderson. John Abercrombie. It's everybody, and now we're kind of back early again.
Yeah. So David, before you go on, actually, since this is getting rather late, let's stop the screen share and let's talk about where people can buy this, and also the website, and also how they can find out about the archives and that kind of thing. So where can people buy this?
They can buy it basically through Share Music, SHER. That's the main way, and you can get it in paper form, which is just being shipped now, or you can get the digital form, which I have the feeling a lot of people will go for. And a lot of times, digital versions are some kind of a quickie scan of the paper. This is not that. It's really beautifully laid out, and it's easy to find. And you can, as you could see, you can scroll in the left-hand column and just go, oh, boom, page 123. It's not just a big scan of the book.
Right.
It's really easy to use in the digital form.
And
you know.
what would be the website for people to know more about the archive?
The website is, well, there's two ways you can access it. Here, let me just walk around this space a little bit. The way you can, excuse me, I hope you don't get dizzy watching me. I always hate watching people walk because it feels like you're about to pass out here. Yeah. So you can either do it through Living Jazz Archives, plural, livingjazzarchives.org, or michaelbreckerarchive.org.
Got it.
Like, for example, this is right away is just reason to visit. These are all Mike's mouthpieces.
That's really cool.
And we have photos of these too. If I put this any lower, it's going to go to sleep.
Right,
this
right,
is
right.
This read stuff. These are all, this is a double line link. And then each of these are auto links that get increasingly more modern. And they've all been worked on. One of them says Tenney Hollywood. I don't know if you know the name Doc Tenney, but he was a famous mouthpiece whisperer. Really knew how to work with mouthpieces. He lived in Iowa. And Tenney Hollywood means to me that he was trying to build out of a link. He was trying to do like an old Hollywood Dukoff mouthpiece with the chamber.
Got it.
And so each one of these have been doctored. They're all sort of 7-star 8 size. Then that's a Dukoff. I don't think one of the ones that he played, but these numbers, Susan numbered them so they could, as you can see, that I have 5. This is number 60. I mean, there's probably 65, 70 mouthpieces, but a lot of them were not ones that he played. This is a Gardala. And on the website, we have photos of all of these close-ups, and we flipped them over so you could see the chamber and the work that had been done with it. You could almost copy it. I mean, you'd need to measure it, but I mean, you can see the kind of work that was being done and the kind of baffle that they had and stuff,
That's really cool.
One other stop we should make. This, I don't know if I can, let me see if I can tilt this. This box right here.
Yes, got it.
These are the notebooks. In other words, it's all about this. Like this page says, after Joni. He did it while he was on tour with Joni Mitchell. And he was kind of making to-do lists. This stuff's all in the book, but these are the original. And as you can see, this is it was a 3-hole punch notebook, and some of the notebooks were, okay. So this is earlier in New York. These were wire bound books, and the wire, it had been in their basement, I think, and the wire ring, binder had started to rust. Yeah. So I called up Susan and I said, I'm getting the wire cutters out. Like, we're going to, so each of these books, that's an acid-free folder. And then each of these pages is interleafed by a page of acid-free paper.
Okay.
So it's basically in suspended animation. And this is stored in a closed box that's acid-free. So, this is actually a page that we looked at, the press hard page.
Oh, yeah,
That says 5 to 58. In other words, that's what it said. And so I don't know what Mike was saying. Can you read it? That's the page we looked at. So it's a mystery what he meant by 5 to 58. I don't know. Yeah. They might have been pages in exercise books that we don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
It's one thing if it was like 56 to 58, then we could assume tempo,
right.
But certainly not 5 beats per minute.
Yeah. So I don't know. And this notebook that did not get published, these are the production mix notes for Pilgrimage. And some of them, the dates on here are very, very sad. This is right up to the end. Oh, by the way, Mike always drew. He was like a doodler. everything has doodles on it.
That's cool.
That's I don't know who that is, but some guy wearing a Sherlock Holmes hat or something. But yeah.
And these
Yeah.
will probably be taken off the wire as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that wire. I mean, this is the way it came to us. It's kind of slightly destroyed.
Yeah, but the great
And if
thing,
you want to
great,
see just where this stuff lives, I know we're running out of time, but this whole wall here. See if I can do this without the computer falling off the stand. These are all manuscripts from all of his albums. Mike had them organized that way, so I did. We used his same folders, came out of his files. And so this is album by album. Don't Try This at Home, the Ballads album, Two Blocks from the Edge, Now You See It, Now You Don't, all the albums. And then down here is Brecker Brothers stuff. We have all the scores and parts for the Klaus Ogerman Cityscape record, which is incredible album with orchestra. And then down at the end, that's all cassettes. You know?
I have a question about the cassettes. I was going to ask this before. So
this is a dream and a nightmare.
Okay, so now let me ask you this question.
1,200 of these.
So when it comes to the cassettes, though, are there going to be plans for you guys to transfer those over to something digital?
Well, I'm doing it slowly but surely. For example, there's Mike and Randy were in a wonderful quintet that was led by Hal Galper, pianist Hal Galper, and Hal himself only had maybe 3 gig tapes of that band. Mike had 9. So it was like Christmas morning with Hal. I said, "Oh, Hal, guess what I found?" And I digitized all those. There's also another, I think there's 14 gigs of Mike and Randy with Horace Silver.
Wow.
And some of them are, Mike putting a cassette player on the floor. It's kind of bad quality, but you can hear the band. And others of them are great quality. There's one at Woolman Skating Rink in Manhattan in Central Park. Wow. I mean, this should be a record. This should come out as a CD. I think some of it is on YouTube. But again, one of the things that readers should understand is we have all this music. Why don't you just put it online? Because it's all copyrighted. Like the Horace Silver, the 14 Horace Silver gigs have all been digitized. But I mean, you have Horace's estate. It's all his tunes. So, I mean, this is for the attorneys to work out, That's
Right.
one thing that not only with this collection, but behind it, Clark Terry's collection, none of this music legally belongs to us. The paper belongs to us, but not the rights to the music.
Interesting.
So
me ask-
the fact that we have some skunk funk here, the original sheet music, the fact that we may have 20 great recordings of it, we can't release any of it because we're the caretaker.
Right.
The people that release it would be attorneys working with the Brecker family.
Right.
And there's constant, this is happening, there's constant projects. Here's, there are other Brecker projects that have come out since Mike has died. Randy has supervised some stuff.
Yeah, that would be great for all this stuff to come out. I'm curious. Let me ask you something though. Someone visits you, right? Can they listen to some of these cassettes or no?
Sure. Well,
they can.
Here's what we do. Like if somebody comes in and says, I see on, and by the way, if you go on the website, there's a list of everything we have.
Okay.
So, here's a cassette of Mike with Joni Mitchell, but it's never been released. So I will play the cassette and make a digital copy of it while I'm playing it. So if anybody comes in and wants to hear something, each of these hundreds of cassettes is going to get played once. You know what I mean? Because the actually cassettes, especially older, newer cassettes later, they're fairly stable.
Okay, because I know, yeah.
The most dangerous way to store audio is burn CDs, because it's a whole different method of putting the material onto the disc than like this CD. That'll last forever because the stuff is placed into the metal and then covered with plastic. Like this'll last pretty much forever. But then if you have like a burn CD, here's a jam session when I was in UMaine Augusta. I have to make sure and get that on the computer, because someday I'm going to put this burn CD in and it's just going to say does not recognize. In other words, it just, it'll just shut off.
Oh my gosh.
For one reason or another. The material will not be recognizable by the CD player.
Wow. Okay, that's really good to know.
And our first priority always is to get, like, one of the things that Susan gave us was a number of, those notebooks that you open them up and it's got CDs, 4 CDs to a page. It's almost like a photo album.
Yeah.
We got those digitized right away because there's no telling how long they'll exist. But the cassettes, they do deteriorate, I suppose, 1/100% every year. But if you're not playing them, and if they're in an archival box, if they're being protected, then hopefully they're okay. I mean, I've never had any issue with any of them. You just have to be careful.
Yeah. Wow. This has been so incredible, David. Just your, first of all, thank you so much for your time. This was so extensive and incredible, and just the work that had not only has been done for the notebooks, but just in general for the archives. And you had mentioned something to the effect of an email that people can reach you at.
Sure. Well, if you go to that website, my email's on there, but it's just my name. I don't know if you are going to post it at all, but it's David Demsey with no P.
Yep.
So it's David Demsey. So my email is DemseyD, DEMSEYD at WPUNJ, like New Jersey.edu.
Got it.
William Paterson University of New Jersey.edu. But that you can click when you're on the website. You can just click on my email address. There's a contact drop down, and you can just click on it. And by the way, every year, every semester, I'll have students contact me from other schools and say, so, I'm doing this Mike Brecker original tune. I transcribed it, but it sure would help me to know what were the changes that Mike wrote for that tune. Like, I know what I took off the record, but what did Mike, and they'll have like, to get technical, like D7 flat 9 sharp 11. And then you look at it and Mike will have written A flat over D.
Interesting.
And you see that kind of makes you play differently. So under those circumstances, I have, in many cases, I just sent the sheet music to students. I'll just send it out. Because most of this music here, the great percentage of it is scanned. So if somebody wants a page of that, I mean, I'm not sure why you'd want that page of Skunk Funk, because basically it's the notes to Skunk Funk. It's been published elsewhere. But a lot of times people want the original page because they want to see what changes Mike wrote.
Interesting.
And a lot of times on on the paper as well as in the notebooks. You'll see him write something and then scratch it out and write something else. Kind of like edit his own stuff. And that's in the notebook too, those edits. You know, you can kind of see his thought process.
Yeah, his thinking.
It's a great privilege that we all have. And, you know, historically, this has never been done in jazz before. Mozart, his notebooks are out, Beethoven, you know, but even, you know, like where are Duke Ellington's workbooks? There must have been some. Maybe they're at the Smithsonian, but this has never happened before. And then, you know, some arrangers like Thad Jones, there were no workbooks. It just went right onto the score page. And in some cases, right straight to parts, no score at all. Genius, you know.
Yeah.
But this is a rare situation where somebody at Mike's stature was such a saver, such a keeper. And we're the beneficiaries of it, all of us. Sorry, Mike. I hope it's not intruding. I think he would approve of this, of the time that's been spent. As I said, he'd be mystified. Like, I don't know why you guys are doing this, but I think he would give it his approval.
For sure. Well, listen, David, I want to thank you so much for your time and extensive knowledge. And I really appreciate you and Chuck and Larry, all the work that you guys did. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking me. This is a great project. And I know that Chuck considers it to be one of his major life accomplishments. And I would consider that for myself too. Not only the notebooks, but everything here. It's, you know, we didn't ask for any of this to happen. God knows we didn't. We don't want to lose Mike. Yeah. I would rather that he's practicing out of these notebooks today, you know. But it's a great honor to be involved with all of it. So thank you.